Pros, save more on the materials you need to get the job done inside and out at Lowe's. Right now, get 10% off in-stock Trex Naturals decking, now available in more styles. Plus, get 15% off select custom entry, interior, and storm doors. Then, we'll deliver it all straight to your job site to help keep your jobs moving. Get the brands pros trust, priced right, and ready when you need them. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 5/27. While supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Hey, so let me know if the background noise is too much. I mean, Judy's inside with her woman's group, so I came out, but then there's outside noise, so you tell me.
To be honest with you, as we reflect on your interview from January of 1986, it's 40 years ago.
Wow.
The interview you did with Miles, I think it's actually appropriate that there should be some background noise because, of course, that conversation was recorded on the terrace of his house in Malibu where you hear the surf, and the sound of that interview was both problematic and also contributed to the way it felt.
And so, carrying on the tradition, we are now on my patio with not surf and waves, but birds and the potential for lawnmowers.
Ooh, lawnmowers. Well, okay.
Could happen. We'll see.
So, Ben, there's so many ways to approach it. This year, it's Miles' 100th birthday, and for the centennial, there are tributes and concerts and recordings and all these things. People are paying homage in a million different ways. And of course, that's a very difficult thing to do when it comes to Miles because he was constantly changing. And when you talked to him, you knew that part of the challenge of talking to Miles was that he would be hesitant to talk about anything that had happened before.
Right.
Can you reach back 40 years into your own memory bank and think about what went through your head as you prepared to talk to him, what the concerns were? What do you remember about that experience?
Well, my first memory is driving up to the house with Tommy LaPuma, of course, being my great pal and Miles' producer. And we're driving down the Pacific Coast Highway or whatever it is. And he's saying to me, now, a lot of people think Miles is difficult to talk to, but that's not the case. You know, what he said was, look, Miles has got a great bullshit detector. And you just be yourself, man, and there won't be any problem. All these stories you hear about Miles saying this or that, maybe he's being provocative or whatever, but he's straight up. And Miles will say this about whites and blacks, but don't you worry.
Yeah.
And, you know, Tommy and I, we're good friends, so if Tommy said that I was trying to keep that in mind. We pull up to Miles's house, and I'm nervous, yeah, because it's Miles. Now, I had run into him a couple times before that, but they were bizarre moments, and I didn't know if Miles had any memory of me or really if my memory of him from those moments had any bearing on an interview. But anyway, the door opened and there he was, and he was so welcoming. It was a little bizarre. He hugged Tommy. Tommy said, Miles, this is my friend Ben. Miles hugged me, invited us in. And it was kind of a moment out of time. Like whatever I had prepared didn't apply anymore. Whatever my fears were didn't apply anymore. Miles was kind of a magical presence, partially because of all the thoughts and hopes and fears that listening to him your whole life conjured up. And then there he is. He wasn't a big guy, and it was back when he had lost his hair, and sometimes he had this elaborate hairpiece on, and this time he didn't. And he had this thing about his skin, it looked burnished. And my first thought was, man, this guy is polished from all the attention that's been paid to him. It's like the energy people had projected on him had polished him. But he was really down to earth. It was like noontime, lunchtime, and he was preparing rice and beans in the kitchen, and he was very casual, and the house was strewn with artifacts from the music of the day. There was a Scritti Politti album, I remember, a couple of trumpets. His blue trumpet was there. And out in the garage, his keyboard player / tech guy Adam Holzman was hammering away. And I mean, it was just a strange combination of the magic and the mundane. And maybe that's a way of looking at Miles, you know. He clearly brought out in people something that they often didn't know they had. And he said that in the conversation. He said, I have this knack of finding people when they're in their creative moment.
They're creative periods. People have creative periods, and they can't necessarily see it, but I can see it in them, he says.
But I can see it. And, you know, having talked to a lot of people who worked with Miles, that's what they said too. I don't know what Miles did. He just, you know, said, be yourself. And the next thing I know, I'm playing up to a different level. So whatever I had in mind, to get back to your question, didn't apply as soon as that door opened.
I mean, I can hear that, and I think the way you handled that was to start the conversation with the immediate facts in front of you. He sat down and he started sketching. And so the first question you ask him is about his drawing and his sketching, which leads you inevitably to the place that you would be led with any question that you asked him, which is into his interior world and the way he thinks about things.
Right. And I also had this feeling that what was special about Miles was his relationship to art in general, not bebop, not music, but, well, he called it balance. When I said to him, you know, you're one of the few players that has made the transition. He said, from what to what? He said, from being a musician to being an artist. And the thing about being an artist, it's an odd thing. As we know, you know, there are a lot of very talented musicians who don't do well in the business or don't do well with the public. He was somehow above or aside to the music business. And I think you're right. Any question I would have asked him would have led me into his interior. But the fact that he was sketching, and as he was talking, he was putting as much attention into the sketch as he was into being where we were. You know, it wasn't actually multitasking, but he was in two places at once. It made him comfortable, I think, as well as making me comfortable. I think sketching made him comfortable. It gave him a place to go that was in the world of art, but wasn't necessarily putting him on the viewing stand. It gave him a way to maintain it.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there. It's very rich. There is a moment in the conversation where he actually makes a little comment. He says, oh, I messed something up here. I got to go. You know, and you hear him kind of step out of the interview. I just heard the interview today. You hear him sort of step out of it and deal with the other thing that he's dealing with, which is this sketch that he's making.
Exactly.
And maybe it's not so much multitasking as it's the opposite. It's a way to open the channel by distracting his hands and even part of his attention to something else.
Yeah.
He was maybe, I mean, not only him, but this is true for all of us, we're maybe a little more access to the subconscious, right? Like even if you think about what meditation is, to hold your attention on something, on the breath, whatever it is, in his case, on the sketch, it actually gives you a way to see what's happening in your mind, what you're experiencing a little differently.
It's like you don't look at something directly. You see it more clearly out of the side of your vision. I totally agree. And that may explain also some of his provocativeness just in life. It's sort of like a magician distracting your attention so that they can operate the way they want to operate. But in any case, he was funny. I remember him being funny. I don't remember any of the jokes. I do remember when he took me and Tommy up to see Cicely Tyson's closet. And he was totally straight-faced. Like, we were talking about art, and he said, you know, one of the reasons he was drawing was because it took Cicely so long to get dressed. Instead of getting mad at her, he started drawing, which was completely made up. I mean, that's not why he started drawing. But he said it with a straight face, and then he said, man, come on, let me show you something. And we followed him upstairs to the closet where Cicely had all her clothes. And he's going, man, you see all this? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was funny. But he played the whole thing straight face.
Yeah. Well, I felt in the conversation, listening to it also, you know, it is not a very long conversation. I know it's edited, but the full interview that I have is like not quite 40 minutes. And I'm going to run about 25 of them today on the podcast. Yeah. And as I listen to it, I'm struck by how many real pearls of wisdom and just classic lines escaped from his mouth in such a short amount of time. It was like almost, well, half of what he said was pure genius. And the other half of it is kind of in order to illustrate an idea or a thought rather than having a direct and precise way to tell it, he does the exact opposite thing. He goes into this long kind of, there was a drummer I knew in St. Louis when I was 15. There was this, Dizzy.
Yeah.
The way he's telling these stories are like very roundabout sometimes. But then at the core of it, he'll say something so classic, like people have their creative periods, or if I couldn't create, I would just want to die. I know it's selfish, but geniuses are selfish. What a line to have come out of his mouth right in front of you.
Yeah, he's constantly discovering himself. That's what it feels like. He's in this space, It's not a technique. It's not for any ulterior purpose. I think that was just who he was, a quirk of his personality or whatever. And it was something that clearly very few musicians had. It was a gift he had. And the music, in a way, was an artifact.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the music. I keep saying that about a lot of these conversations that we have. The musician is the information. The musician is the message. The music is the artifact of the message.
I come up against that so often, and I wonder how Miles would feel about that statement, because so often when I want to talk to people about where, their journey, their path, what they chose to do with their lives, I am met occasionally, not even by the musicians, but often, interestingly, by the business of the music, by the publicists and the other journalists or whatever, with the response that no, focus on the music. The music is what matters.
Right.
Why do you want to talk to these people about where they came from or where they live or their extracurricular activities? You should be focusing on the music that they make. And it's so interesting that I'm often drawn to exactly what you're talking about, the person, and because I think maybe because I agree with you. No, the person is the art.
The person is the art, because music transforms you. I would bet Miles is a classic example of being transformed at a young age by the music. And once you're transformed, you can't go back. And Miles says that always. You can't go back. I'm not going back. I'm not going back. He's embracing the personal transformation wherever it took him. And it took him into some wild and dangerous places in his life. But he maintained that position. Mm-hmm. That's what was important. And, I'd like to talk about the space between the notes. Well, Miles is the premier example of the space between the notes being as important as the notes. Like when I ask him what about those pretty notes you play? Yeah, pretty notes, man. It's just some major notes that should be played. Well, that's not saying anything, really.
Yeah, but he also has this brilliant line where he says it's like putting lemon on fish. It brings out the flavor. It brings out these pretty notes bring out the sound of the composition. They bring out something that will unlock the people around me and their understanding of the music.
Another side glance, man. Looking left so that you can look right.
Yeah.
This process that he had really is what enlightened all these musicians who played with him. I mean, like when you ask musicians about Dizzy Gillespie, they invariably talk about his knowledge and how he'd be more than happy to go and sit at the piano and show you this stuff. But when you ask him about Miles, there's nothing pedantic at all. It's like there's something like putting lemon on fish, man. I mean, it's like cooking.
Yeah, and as you say, hearing him talk is a little bit like hearing him discover himself, because the other thing is he is so straight-faced and he was so intimidating, and even the people that he trusted and developed a friendship with, I think you were always a little bit on edge. And I can even hear in the interview with him where he is a little bit nostalgic. I mean, you were able to unlock talking about Duke Ellington or talking about, you were able to get him to talk about Kinda Blue, which I think probably is why this interview stands out as one of the iconic interviews of the era, because he was willing to look back. For a minute, he would indulge it, and then he would say in the same breath, but I can't go back. Those songs are me, body and soul. We don't need that anymore. We have no use for that anymore, he says.
Yeah. Miles didn't hedge any bets. I'm thinking about the time at the end of his life, he's in the hospital. and he calls up Tommy LaPuma. He's in this hospital bed. He's got all these cassette tapes scattered everywhere, and he calls up Tommy. He says, Tommy, you got to come down here, man. I got something I want to play for you. And Tommy rushes down to the hospital and goes up to Miles, and Miles says, here, Tommy, and puts the cassette in the thing and plays it for him. And when it's over, Tommy says, oh, Miles, yeah, that's really good. You know what we could do with something like that? And Miles cuts him off and says, Tommy, I didn't want to know what you thought about it. I just wanted to play it for you. He just wants the moment to happen. He doesn't want a discussion about the moment. But I did. I poked the bear just enough where I felt him get nostalgic. I mean, it was a palpable feeling sitting there with him getting nostalgic. And you can hear it when he goes, oh, man, those days. Because, you know, he was as perceptive as anybody you run into, and he could feel what was happening with music. He knew that what used to be a whole world was now a marginalized part of a large business.
There is a kind of a tension inside of the conversation I hear because he's so focused on technology. This is in a period where he's interested in synthesizers and he's talking about sampling. He's dealing with technology and he's very focused on it. And at the same time, he says, you know, those days are gone. And then he says something that to me, through the prism of the moment, really vibrated for me, which was, he says, now with all of the access to recordings, nobody has a sound. He says this 40 years ago.
Yes.
He says, with all these records and all these cassettes and everybody's listening to everything and they're studying it in this way, everybody lost their sound. Whereas when we didn't have access to the music, you only heard a few people and you had to imagine. That's what led to people's sounds. And there's a huge tension in his thinking because he's very much involved in technology in the moment. And on the other hand, he's saying people lost their sound because they heard too much and it robbed them of their own imagination.
Yeah. And so you can only imagine what his daily life was like, the assault of being Miles Davis, wherever you were, especially in the business and particularly among other musicians. I mean, you know how it is when you first get on the scene, man, and you're hanging, and he was hanging with Bird, and he was hanging with all these characters, and the hang was so powerful and intensive. And then over the years, it turns into something quotidian, not just mundane or normalized, but somehow the magic gradually gets drained out of it, and it becomes more of a routine. And you can almost feel him as he goes through his career fighting against this, fighting against having it be normalized, that there's some aspect of what we do that's more related to the unknown, more related to magic, more related to the space between the notes. You can tell how I play by the way I stand. It's, you know...
He says that, by the way I hold the horn.
By the way I hold the horn. And it was funny, you know, that all these people put this rap on him that he disrespected the audience by turning his back. That had nothing to do with what he was doing. And yet... he had to carry that for years, that people were saying, oh, look, he's turned his back. Look, it's one of those moments. No, it isn't. He's up there just trying to make this thing happen. It's got nothing to do with you.
You know, we're kind of contextualizing an interview that we're going to let people hear in a second. But, you know, he says, yeah, I figured out that if I point the bell of the horn to different corners of the room, I get a different reflection back. You can get different sounds. And then he says, and that's part of why I had to leave Juilliard, because Juilliard, they were going to have me stand and play in a certain way that was going to basically remove my personality from my playing. I had to get out of there.
Yeah.
I had to go home and tell my father I wasn't going to stay in Juilliard anymore.
Right. So every musical decision, comment, everything goes back to life. Everyone.
Yeah. There is an aspect of it that I think is very present for him over and over in the conversation, and that is his father. You know, my father taught me to sketch. My father was a serious man. My father was a dental surgeon. When I dropped out of school, I knew I couldn't pick up the phone and call him. I had to take a train to St. Louis to tell him in person I was going to do this. His father is very present in his thinking.
Well, in some ways, it seemed to me that his father was present, again, by not being so much in his face, but being off to the side. His father didn't seem to be domineering at all or super concerned about his safety, you know, and I think that inevitably gives you strength when you feel this confidence or trust coming from your parent, you feel, well, oh, okay, maybe I'm okay. Maybe this is okay. And for a young boy who is about to launch off into this mysterious occupation, I think his father's quietness in some ways, and I only know this by inference, I don't know
Yeah.
what their conversations were, obviously, but when he talks about his father, it's more about his father as a presence, not somebody giving him advice, not somebody warning him about any dangers. A presence, being. His father was on the planet with him.
Yes, he was there with him, and he describes this moment when he decides he's going to drop out of Juilliard, and he knows he's got to go home and tell his dad he's dropping out of school. And so, what does he say? He says, "Man, there's this music out there,
Yeah.
and it ain't happening at Juilliard.
Yeah.
I'm learning more on the street," he says,
Yeah.
"with Diz and Bird than I am in the school, and I need to do that."
Yeah.
And he says to you, because my dad didn't know who any of these people were. He might have known who Count Basie was, but
Yeah.
he didn't know who Dizzy Gillespie was.
Right.
There's something so universal about that. Of course, now the music that we're talking about has been, we talk about this over and over again, has been institutionalized and elevated and is America's classical music, et cetera, et cetera. But in the moment,
Back then,
it was,
when it was happening, it was a lot like going into there be dragons on this part of the map. Nobody's been there.
yeah, right. It's off the map.
Off
It's not
the
even
map.
on the map.
I guess that's the best way to put it. Miles
Yeah, it
was living off the map.
All right. So, do you have a memory of walking out of that interview, Ben, and thinking, if that is half as great as what I think it is, this is an important moment for me. I did something significant. This might be a historical artifact. It has to be your most revisited interview of the hundreds of interviews that you did. It has to be the one that follows you most closely.
Yeah, well, of course, that's more because of him than me. I'm not sure what I felt, but over time, I realized I had been totally charmed by Miles, and I didn't ask or talk about a whole bunch of stuff that I could have.
That's the story of my life, man.
It was like being in the presence of a magician. It definitely had a kind of a transforming effect on me, in that when you realize that this musical god is just a person, and being just a person is the takeaway. Being a person is the magic of it. It throws this constant striving to be outside of yourself into a new light, where you don't want to be outside of yourself, you want to be inside of yourself. You want to do your work. And I guess I felt in some ways, gee, I guess I failed as an interviewer. I didn't ask all this stuff, and I didn't talk about all these things. I was just there for me. I was there to hang with Miles.
I imagine playing with him might be similar too. I didn't get to play all my licks that I wanted to play for him.
Yes.
Instead, I just played this music that we were playing together. I mean, you could over prepare or believe that you've got all this great shit you're going to play with him, and then when you played with him, you played whatever was happening in that moment. That's the message everybody talks about.
Amen. Amen.
On the other hand, what I hear you say is, if you were hypnotized by him and he was a magician, then rather than leading him into that nostalgic space that day, it's actually more that he allowed you in there, and that he was totally, because what I'm hearing you describe is, no, he was totally in control.
Yes.
He allowed that to happen.
He welcomed me totally. At one point, he says to me, "Hey, have a potato chip, And I'm going crazy because I know his chewing the potato chip is going on tape. Get rid of these potato chips. No, man, have a potato chip. That's the level. It's interesting. All the back and forth we're talking about, the emotional level was two guys sitting on a wooden deck by the ocean, and one guy says, "Have a potato chip." That's what it felt like.
Well, Ben, I'm so happy that this interview exists, and I'm so grateful that I have access to it and we can revisit it today. And I'm grateful that you exist and we can talk about it. I mean, Ben, how about this? You're 42 years old when that interview is done.
Wow.
He's 60 years old.
Wow.
Today, I'm 49 and you're 82.
Yeah. And time stands still.
And it's all one long moment.
It's one moment. We're in that moment, man. Well, I can't wait to hear the show.
Well, yeah, I mean, because of the nature of life this week, I'm just going to go ahead right now and say, as everybody knows already if they're here, third-story.com is the place to visit the archive, including many wonderful conversations between the two of us. Also, I'm on Substack, leosidran.substack.com, which is kind of my regular spot for all kinds of dispatches and writing. Of course, we are also made in partnership with WBGO Studios, WBGO.org.
Allow me to say this. Here's Leo Sidran and Ben Sidran and Miles Davis talking it down.
As we're talking, you're starting to do some drawing. You always been involved in drawing?
Yeah, my father taught my brother, I showed my brother how to sketch. Not how, but just started to sketch it. My brother can see anything and draw it right off. But he doesn't have an imagination like I have.
So the imagination is...
What's that? In everything. Imagination.
That's my impression, that your drawings are like you're playing in some ways. It's
Well, what it
gestures.
does is it's balance. If you make a drawing, a sketch on a page, you have to balance it, And that's the way almost everything is. Art is. Music, composition, solos, clothes, when you dress up.
balance.
Yeah. A little over here, a little there, a little there.
When I first noticed your sketching, of course, was on your albums as you started to introduce it.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something you've always done? Has it always been part of your artistic process, drawing?
Yeah. I stopped a while, but when I laid off it, I really started to sketch again after I married Sidran, because she takes so long. Actresses, it takes so long to get ready for anything. Rather than scream at her, I just started sketching, especially on planes. After we had a close call going to Peru for the Miss Universe contest, the plane dropped about 2,500 feet, and then it dropped another 1,000 feet. And everybody some people were crying, and then I started sketching, because it really scared. That's really a trip to do that. So now when I fly from New York to California, sometimes I sketch. Most all the time I sketch. All the time I sketch. If I go to sleep, I'm sketching. And I've done sketches it took me 5 hours, to finish. But it relaxes you,
You're spending most of your time in California now.
Most of the time, I try to stay here because of my circulation, good for my circulation. The cold weather really does a number on my skin, and in New York, the air's dirty, the streets are dirty. But that pace in New York, I love that pace. So I would never just live out here all seasons, just in the wintertime. Either there or the south of France.
You really are part of the greater art community, not just the music community. You're one of the few musicians in American jazz to have made that transition.
From what to what?
From being thought of as a player to being thought of as an artist.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's... If I was thought of anywhere else than that, I wouldn't want to be here. If I couldn't contribute. If I couldn't discover something or help the art, a new way to do this, like that, I wouldn't want to be here. I would just want to be dead if I couldn't create. That's what I'm trying to say. If I couldn't create, I wouldn't. It would be nothing for me to live for, If I couldn't, maybe write a composition that I'd like, not somebody else, that I would like and my friends would like. And they say, yeah, Miles, that's good. If I couldn't do that, I wouldn't want to be here. It's selfish, I know, but geniuses are selfish.
Part of your genius has been, it seems, to take groups of musicians and put them in challenging situations. Looking back over the output of your recorded work, the newness, a lot of times, stands out as much as anything. The fact that you're creating situations that force musicians to rely on their instincts rather than their habits.
That's right. It's the group of people that you associate with. It's not all me, it's them. People like Herbie Hancock, those people that I work with, Chick Corea, they're talented people, especially when they get in their creative period, people have creative periods where they, like that, and then if they could just wait on that, or recognize it when it's there, I recognize it in other people, I recognize it in Wayne Shorter and Herbie, and Chick, Keith Jarrett, Sonny Rollins, different people, Philly Joe and Red Garland, Randy, even Adam here, George Duke.
Again, part of the message of your music seems to be yourself, and the minimalism of your own music, the pretty notes, as opposed to a lot of notes.
Pretty notes. If you play a sound, you have to pick out, it's like the eye of the hurricane, you have to pick out the most important note that fertilizes the sound. You know what I mean? It makes the sound grow, and then it makes it definite so your other colleagues can hear and react to it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you play what's already there, they know what's there, The thing is to bring it out, you know what I mean? It's like putting lemon on fish or vegetables. It brings out the flavor. And that's what they call pretty notes. Them just major notes that should be played, in rhythms and stuff. A lot of times I would tell Herbie to lay out, he wrote a couple of pieces that were up in tempo. And rather than have him play the sound for me, I played the sound for him to listen to, of the composition he wrote.
You talk about the sound of the composition as if a song or composition has a central sound to it, a sound source.
I try to get his sound, whoever's writing the composition. If I'm going to play something against that, I have to get the sound that he wants in there without destroying it and blowing over it, so that not to bury it. You know what I mean? It really takes a long time to do that, If you lean in that way, it's not. But if you aren't, somebody tells you.
This conversation about the sound of the composition brings to mind the recording Kinda Blue. Kinda Blue is the #1 jazz record on virtually all the critics' lists. When you see the list published of your 10 most favorite records, Kinda Blue is always on those lists.
Isn't that so?
Does the success of that record surprise you, Miles? It seems like such a simple record to have made in a way.
Not back there. Because Bill Evans is one of my all-time favorite pianists, Bill Evans. His approach to the piano just brought that piece out. And Bill used to tell me about different modes, which I already knew. And we just agreed on something, and that's the way the album went. We were just leaning toward like Ravel and playing a sound with only the white keys, Dorian minor modes, and it just came out. It was just a thing to do. You know what I mean? Like an architect, all of a sudden, all of the architects in the world would start making circles. Like Frank Lloyd Wright. All his colleagues that are leaning that way thought the same way at the same time, you know. And it was made for Coltrane,
Yes.
you know, that kind of thing. Because I used to give him a lot of chords. I'd give him like 5 chords in one. And I told him, you can play either one, you know. So he was the only way one could do that, who can just turn you on with a sound of one note and a group of notes. Only 2 people I ever heard doing that was Charlie Parker and Coltrane. You know, that's only 2. You know, and then I gave him those chords, and he just went, you know, because he wasn't playing like that. You know, so I gave him all these options. I mean, it sounds technical, but you have to think like that if you're an artist. You know, you have to know how to do different things.
Hearing you talk about this session, I'm struck by the fact that, like Duke Ellington, you would prepare music for your players rather than bring music to them and say, play this. That the music really does come out of the people you're hanging out with and recording with.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Duke is one of my favorite composers. You know, he just lately I've been hearing in my head Rain Check that he wrote. It's the name of a song.
You mentioned Coltrane's sound on the soprano saxophone. At one point, Coltrane said that he had been hearing a higher sound and hearing a higher sound. It wasn't until he had his hands on the soprano that he actually was able to realize what he'd been hearing in his head.
Right. See, it takes a long time for guys to develop. You know what I mean?
How come nobody can get your sound? It's a simple gesture, it seems, but it's very difficult.
I have my own sound because when I was like this, my trumpet instructor, I loved the way his sound, you know. He was black and he used to play with Andy Kirk, and he played in the low registers like Harold Baker, and you know, I just leaned toward that cornet sound, you know, like Nat Adderley plays cornet. But it's just a sound, and it's, you know, it's just popular. You know, like years ago, composers, the reason Beethoven was you read about Beethoven because he was the one that they could understand. The other ones, you know, that they couldn't understand, they didn't even mention it. So my tone must be the easiest for somebody to hear, you know, like Louis Armstrong and that kind of a sound. But see, your sound is like, you know, it's like your sweat. You know, your sound. Lester Young had his sound. Eddie Davis, Coleman Hawkins, Browning, Clifford Browning, Fats Navarro. You know, there's no more sound. But now that you have so many records and cassettes, it's no more sound. They copy it. They copy the sound. You know what I mean?
Huh.
That's the reason they can put the sound in a keyboard. But it's a white sound in the keyboard. You know, it's a white trumpet player's sound in the keyboard for trumpet.
You can't put the black sound in the keyboard.
Nobody's done it yet. I put it in there. I put my sound in there.
You mean sampling the computer.
Yeah. But if you just buy a keyboard, it has a white sound, trumpet player.
That's an interesting point, though, that before there was such wide recording distribution, people were forced to develop their own sounds.
They didn't have anything to listen to, you know? But you watch guys play an instrument and you like the attitude, the concept, the way it looks, the way they hold it, the way they dress.
You mentioned people getting excited about watching a player, and I remember you saying at one point, well, you can know everything you need to know about how I play by watching how I stand.
It's a certain way, like when I play, sometimes if I play about that high from the floor, it's another sound that you can get. But I found out in Juilliard that if I stayed any longer, you know, I was gonna have to play like a white man, you know, and I was gonna have to act like a white excitement toward music than the direction, you know what I mean? So I left, you know, because there was certain things you had to do, a certain way you had to play to get in there and to be with them. And I didn't come all the way from St. Louis just to be with a white orchestra, you know. I turned down a lot of those. But I found out, you know, that I could go my own way. I had to catch a, my friend Freddie Webster, I said, Freddie, I'm going to St. Louis, you know. And he was one of those guys. I said, man, you know if you go to St. Louis, back to St. Louis, and them hooges, them crackers there, you're going to get mad and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you might get killed. So I said, no, I have to go to tell my father that I'm going to leave Juilliard. He said, why don't you call him up? I said, not my father. I can't call him up and say, I'm going with Bird and they do this and Dizzy is this. You know, he was a professional man. He was a surgeon, right?
I know.
So he said, okay. So I called the train. I went in his office. He looked up and said, what the fuck are you doing here? He was, you know, working on a patient. He was a dentist, dental surgeon. So when he got through, I said, this music is happening, Juilliard isn't. And I'm down on the street where everything's happening. More so, I'm learning more down there what I want to do than in Juilliard. You know, my trumpet instructor at Juilliard is still in the Philharmonic Orchestra in New York. I think he taught Winton. I think Winton, you know, took some lessons from him. But I couldn't do that, you know. So he said, okay. So I said, save your money, you know. So that was it. I couldn't phone him from New York and tell him that. You know, Duke Ellington he knew, but not Dizzy and Bird and Monk and Coleman Hawkins. Although we did have a record of Coleman Hawkins playing Body and Soul. And Art Tatum. That's the only records we had in our house. We had MJ Blues by Duke with Jimmy Blanton. Blanton is from St. Louis, from my hometown.
Uh-huh.
And Duke Ellington, that's it. And Art Tatum. Oh yeah, and I had Bird on with Jay McShann, Hootie Blues.
Oh, yeah.
And Basie here, we had quite a few. Well, that was after I knew what I wanted to hear. Because those bands, those days, Earl Hines and those Jimmy Lumpson, Sonny Stitt was with the McKinley Cotton Pickers, and they had heard about me in St. Louis, and they wanted me to go, and my mother wouldn't let me go. I said, oh, shit.
You got there by going to Juilliard, in other words.
Right.
Yeah. These days you're talking about, it seems so far away from today. The times, the way music was treated
Yeah, I
by
know.
players.
Something else gets in your mind, in my head, but those are good memories for me, you know.
It seems today musicians do have difficulty keeping interested in the music when in the past it was everything.
You know, it's because they don't take time out to learn different things, you know. I was reading this damn thing in the Times about jazz legends. They shouldn't have to call up people and ask them, can we play here and stuff like that. You know, I don't do that. You know, I would never do that. You know, I didn't get in music, you know, just to make money and stuff like that. If I wanted to make money, I'd know what to do, you know. I used to rehearse with Mingus and Buddy Collette in 1947 here. I stayed a year here, you know.
I just saw an album cover, a picture of you and Chet Baker and somebody else, I forget. They just
Rolf
put it out.
Erickson, maybe.
Maybe so. It seems a major thing has happened to all music, not just jazz, and that is it's moved from music that was captured in a recording studio to music that was manufactured in this recording studio. It's a whole different premise now.
We don't do that. We sequence the layers of orchestration and we play the same thing in person, but only we goose it a little bit. You know what I mean? You're free to improvise.
In talking to John Schofield at one point, he described recording with you that at one point you were rehearsing and that he had just played a line at your house and you came in the next day and that was the tune. And
Yeah. John is very melodic. Only trouble John has, he plays too far behind the beat, you know. After he was getting out of that, you know. But
how is recording a record like You're Under Arrest now, which is a large process, and different from the way you used to make a record where you'd come in with some tunes and go out?
it's easier.
Really?
Because Randy and Zane and Adam, I'll show Adam what I want, write it out or play it. He'll play it when we get to the studio. When I get there, all of that is in the on tape. You know, it feeds it right to the board, and all I have to do is play over it. It's easy like that. I like to went crazy trying to make decoy. I mean, I threw everything out, and we just started from scratch with me. And now I just take studio, Adam, we use a drum machine to keep it in, because I tried to put things together in decoy, and the ones that didn't have it in the drum machine, the tempo was doing this and doing that. And musicians feel sad, they have personalities like Al Foston, like some of them want to play and it's no part for them. You know, I can see they don't feel it. But rather than wait for 2 and 3 sessions for them to feel like it and learn the composition, how to add to the composition, rather playing over it like a lot of guys do. They play too many fucking notes. Like Mike Stern, I tell him all the time, I said, Mike, you need to go to Notes Anonymous. You know, like the AAA. I mean, it's much easier now for me. Because, like a guy like George Duke, he writes the composition, it's all there. All you have to do is play on it. And respect the man's, composition, But you have to pick the people that you want. You see, my voice is changing because, this is very touchy with me. I don't want to fire him. But I do want, when a person writes a composition, you have to let that composition soak in. You know what I mean? You have to try to see or hear what the composer wanted, and you have to play that style. Not that you're just gonna play your style in somebody else's music. If they compose it, they didn't want that kind of thing in there, and you're gonna do it on every number. So we don't need that. Or if you're in a rhythm section and the tempo drops, you get mad because somebody tells you the tempo drops. We don't need that. We have time, and it's right there. Long as electricity is on, the tempo is like that. And you don't have to use an excuse like, I can't play with the drum machine, or it's no excuse. If you're a musician, if you love music, you would want Body and Soul to sound like Body and Soul, or you would want for Human Nature to sound like Human Nature that Michael did,
Well, what about Body and Soul, and what about those pretty songs?
Those songs, to me, don't exist. We don't have time for Body and Soul, and I Got Rhythm, Or So What? All kind of blues. Those things are there. They were done in that area, the right hour, the right day, and it happened. It's over. It's on the record. People ask me, why don't you play this? Go buy the record. It's still there. What you like is on the record. You don't like me. But I don't want you to like me now, unless you like the music. You know, don't like me because of kind of blue. Like me for what for what we're doing. You know, I was put here to play music and interpret music. That's what I do. No attitude, nothing. That's all I want to do, and I do it good. You know, because my colleagues say, yeah. You know what I mean? And that's enough for me to keep doing what I do, you know? I stopped playing trumpet. Dizzy came over my house and said, what the fuck is wrong with you? Are you crazy or something? I said, man, you better get out of here. He said, no, I'm not either. He's like my brother, you know? But that's it for me, you know? All the rest, people think I do this, I do that, I do that. Yeah, I do that and this, you know, I might do a lot of things, but the main thing that I love, it comes before everything, even breathing, is music. That's it, you know, nothing. You know, I buy Ferraris, cars, a box, yeah, but music is always there, right there.
Because you can't go back.
I can.
I got one more question for you. The song Nardis. How did you happen to name it Nardis? Do you remember?
No, I can't remember. It might have something to do with nuclear.
It was a long time ago, I guess.
I know I did it for Cannibal. I think I just like the name. What does it mean?
I don't know, but it's my last name backwards.
Again. I don't know, but that's a nice name. Again.
Thank you very much for having us in your home, and we can't wait to hear what your next record is going to sound like.
I can't wait myself. I want to see how you react to it.
There it was, my friends, Ben Sidran and Miles Davis back in 1986, talking the talk. I'll be back again in your headspace with another deep dive before you know it. Until then, Ben, say it with me.
I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you soon.
I'll talk to you soon.
You count to 3 and it'll work on my end. So count to 3 and we'll do it.
1, 2, 3. I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you soon.
No, I'm
just
gonna
keep
point
going.
you. I'm going to point you now.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. I'll
talk to you soon.
No, forget it. It's terrible. It's terrible. Call me from the airport.
I will. You got it. I'll call you in a minute.
This has been a WBGO Studios production. To learn more about WBGO Studios' award-winning podcasts, special concerts, live streams, and more, visit wbgo.org/studios.